Hey everybody, this is Rob, Frontline Mindset with National Fire Radio. I'm excited today because I've brought a special guest on who I happened to read an article in Firehouse Magazine, and we've been doing this thing called Articles You Should Know. And this article is in last month's magazine, I believe, and it was about mental health and first responders, and more importantly, the patients that we were treating and the need for training. So I'm here today to introduce Megan Funk. She's a firefighter out in Illinois. Megan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, Megan, really quick for our listeners out there, where are you from? And this, like, kind of your a brief bio, if you will,
Of
or an
course.
introduction.
I am from the Chicago suburbs, so we're from the northwest suburbs, born and raised out that way. Got involved into the fire service around 2013. Originally, I wanted to be a physician's assistant and found my way kind of into this line of work on accident and found a huge love for EMS by virtue of that. And so followed the course. I work for St. Charles Fire Department, and I've been there for about 8.5 years now.
And when you say you fell into this, I mean, that's how I feel I got into emergency services was through the ambulance. But like, how did that bridge get gapped there, or that gap get bridged, I should say?
So, I got my degree in biology, and in order to apply for PA programs, they want 1,000 hours of patient contact. Originally, I started working as a CNA for a nursing home, and I found that that wasn't really it didn't really fill my cup, so to say. So I was talking to a friend who I didn't know was a firefighter at the time, and he said, "You should go get your EMT license." And at that time, I thought ambulances came from the hospital. I was like, sure, why not? So that started EMT, and then I got my EMT license. And from there, I was working as a bartender at the time and just happened to be talking about it to one of my regulars. And he's like, "Oh, do you want to go to the fire academy?" I'm like, "I don't even know what that means." And it was a chief of one of our local departments. So I was definitely given the silver spoon for the fire service, where I had a lot of really great connections and people pushed me in the right way. And then after the fire academy, that was it. I just fell in love with everything that this job offers. I think being a PA would be helpful, but I really think of us as being frontline to be able to help change people's lives. It's been a great job so far.
Yeah. When was did you have like a moment where you realized in this transition that you were like, this is where I'm supposed to be? And what was it?
Yes. So the department I started working for, it doesn't exist anymore, but it's called Elk Grove Township, and they service some trailer parks that exist on either side of I-90 closer to Chicago. And a lot of the people in those areas don't have access to health care. And I think it was there that, people would call us for all kinds of things, whether they felt sick or chest pain, or, sometimes it was fairly benign. But I found that by being kind to these people, it could kind of just change their whole day. And
Hmm.
I think that's really where it kind of got to me, was like, this is where people are having bad days and they don't always want to call us, but if I can help make their bad day a little bit better, it just was so rewarding. And we had, quite a few regulars who, over the course of time, I would just build camaraderie with. And, I really enjoyed that aspect of being out there, helping people.
I think of, uh, trailer parks and my career, and some of my best patient friendships, if you will, have come from people who are just salt of the earth, but they just happen to be in the trailer park, and it gets a bad
Hmm.
stereotype sometimes. But we've really seen a couple over my lifetime who I really developed. I don't want to say like, well, I guess a friendship would be, because when I saw them out, in the
Hmm.
supermarket or something like that, you'd engage them in conversation, and it is a different environment for sure. And there's always something cool about being able to build that rapport with people.
Yeah, building
So that's
kindness, it helps.
yeah. And then, like, obviously too, I mean, having I'm gonna assume that you've ran a couple fires
Hmm.
in these complexes, and I always think that, like, to me, trailer fires are one of the most interesting fires, because it's either you're going into them, like, there's no, I don't want to say there's not a book on them, but it's not like something that people talk about the tactics. You're not going to a FDIC style conference to hear about fires and mobile homes and stuff like that. But it is a I've always had the most fun in some of those type of fire environments myself.
Oh yeah, it's a unique challenge where it's small and they're all very close to each other. So, man, on a windy day, you actually bring up a good point. I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about tactics in those types of fire scenarios because, yeah, you have to be a little bit more aggressive to at least protect exposures. It was a great learning
Yeah.
experience for me.
Yeah, and there's I think too the other thing is like from my experiences it's either been something underneath the skirt of the trailer that has started the fire, so you've had fire extending up through various points in the so you're chasing it that way, or there's been some kind of heater or electrical issue, like heat tape or something that
Oh,
started a fire
yes.
in the living area, and then like I said, it's still in you've got a small window of opportunity there, but it's also, one of the few times I think in the fire service where we get theatrical fire because of the makeup of the buildings, and you can actually see what's going on.
Yeah,
So that's always the fun part of it.
very
Um,
true.
you have this academic background in biomedical science.
Hmm.
Um, how does that kind of do you find yourself crossing the from that biomedical background and bringing it into the fire service at all?
I definitely think it keeps me driven to keeping up to date on like current EMS trends, or I'm really big on scientifically backed information. So, I know like one of the big things we talk about nowadays is kind of sea collars.
Mm-hmm.
And we have had this discussion, at least in our firehouse and amongst our guys, a couple of times of like, are we seeing trends with scientific data that sea collars are still effective? And while I can't make change personally and I still follow protocols, these are all good topics that we can bring up to, our EMS system itself. If we can be kind of figureheads of change, I am here for it. And I also love knowing the why behind we do what we do. So, yes, like we give drugs for this reason, but if I understand the pathophysiology behind it, I feel like I'm better prepared to help give the best patient care possible. What can I do to help remedy the actual true problem for this patient as far as we see the effects of it, or like whatever their symptoms are. It's
Right.
definitely, I have a big love for EMS, and I
Yeah.
love seeing how it's grown over time.
Yeah, and I also, I mean, one of the things about EMS, and Jeremy sometimes would knock on me, not knock on me, but he's always reminding me that secretly I love EMS. Um, but like it is the area where you get the challenge. Like I mean, yes,
Hmm.
firefighting in all its aspects is challenging of its own, but like each time with a patient is uniquely different, and kind of like just being able to bridge those gaps and connect those dots in that environment sometimes is very, especially when you do something that has an immediate, like we're a BLS agency where I
Hmm.
am in New York, but we recently in the last couple of years started doing epinephrine in the field,
Nice.
for allergic reactions, and that's something where you start to see that work very quickly, and it's just to understand what it's doing, that this allergen is affecting the body. You're seeing it in front of you, and then you're administering a medication that's making the situation better. It's kind of neat, to see sometimes, so I share in that, as far as especially knowing the why and everything else.
Oh yes. I love a good fire call. I love any kind of good call that gets us hands on. But I've always told like my friends and family, like when you run a good EMS call and you can say that someone's life they either are alive because of the work that you guys did or their life has been improved because you did it well, like that's kind of a amazing feeling.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, Megan, is that the improvement of life, because I remember as a young EMT working with this old school paramedic, Mike Bruce, we were within, like I could, with not even 100 yards away was a hospital, but we had a patient who was having congestive heart failure really bad. Their lungs were filled with fluid, and we stayed on the scene, and I thought it was at the time, like I was like, no, let's just scoop him up and go to the hospital. And we started an IV. We gave, paste, nitro paste, and did Lasix, and we improved the patient's condition so that they weren't as junky as they were when we first got there. They were breathing comfortably, able to start having a conversation, and just like we treated the patient, and we affected that quality change and improvement for them, and delivered a better patient to the hospital than what we would have if we had just scooped them up. And when Mike kind of let me in on that and why we did the things we did, like my eyes just opened to the fact of like this was a good call where we actually helped somebody, and like I said, we found him in a really bad spot, and yes, we could have taken the easy way out and just swooped and run, but we actually treated him and cared for him and delivered him into a better, better status to the hospital, which was, you know, it was a fantastic learning opportunity for me as a kid.
I love that. And that's huge because 100% I agree with how you guys handled it because yes, you can load and go. And sometimes that's a temptation for people, but you have to think it's time to get to the hospital, even if you're close. And then you have to give the report. Then the doctors have to, and the nurses have to do their own assessment. So
Hmm.
if you can provide immediate care, like that's huge. And you just change that patient's whole day.
Yeah. Um, so this article in Firehouse Magazine, what inspired you to write it?
A couple of different things, but the main point is that I've definitely seen over the course of my career, but more so within the last few years, a rise in psychiatric calls. Whether it's people struggling with depression or people who are struggling with bipolar disorder or any other kind of mental health issue, it's definitely become a trend where we're seeing more and more of them and we're seeing them more regularly. And I was kind of curious originally, like what that cause might be. Are we seeing that more people are being diagnosed? So I kind of did like a little deep dive. And unfortunately, one of the biggest things I found is that access to mental health care has just deteriorated over the last few years. I remember because my mom loves to read my articles. She thought it was a typo when I had talked about how there were I think it was over 300 beds per 100,000 patients, 337 beds per 100 patients 10 years ago. And then as of 2022, it drops to 11.7. And what that is showing me is, okay, we don't have space for these people and we don't have like they're not getting the care that they deserve. And so when they have nowhere else to turn, we are the ones to show up. And then
Right.
that kind of that really, like you said, it opened up my eyes to, wow, I need to start taking these calls more seriously because I think previously, just kind of with culture and everything, it was easy to go on a psych call, just say, all right, we're just going to take them to the hospital. But when you really look at it with the eyes of this is a person who doesn't get the care that they deserve, now what can I do to help this patient? What can I do to help improve their quality of life? Because even though my time with them might be limited, can I do anything to help them? And that really, as a whole, at least our department has been really good about what more can we do for these patients? How can we help them? And it's actually changed a lot of the ways in which we treat our behavioral health calls overall.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because one of the things that as you're explaining this, I'm in the back of my head. There's like a guy with a bullhorn screaming, "Advocate!"
Mm-hmm.
Advocate for your patients because I think that the mental health population is one of the most under advocated patient demographics that we have, and it's very easy to get into that mindset of just shuffling them up into and putting them into the system, and then being upset
Mm-hmm.
that the system spit them out exactly how we put them in there.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, yeah, I mean, emergency rooms are designed to help the emergent problem, but behavioral health is going to be a persistent and consistent problem. So it's not where they're not gonna be able to get all of the help they need there.
Was there a specific call or something that sparked this for you that you were like, or was it just over time complete ADHD moment and you were like, huh, what about this?
Probably a little bit of both. I definitely have a little bit of ADD. No, I know we had a patient one time who had called us and he was in his 30s and he was struggling with depression and addiction and just felt, you could tell that he just felt lost. His parents had made the hard choice to say, until you're clean, you can't come home, which had to be a very difficult choice for them, but also a very valid choice. And in talking to him in the back, it was kind of a short stint, but I realized that he just didn't have the answers. And it's not as easy as like, okay, if someone's got a diabetic issue, we can help them with their sugar regulation or something like that. It's like, no, this is something where you need more care. Like you need to be able to have access to therapists. You need to have access to people who are going to specialize in addiction recovery. And I remember just, feeling heartbroken for this poor guy. Like he wanted help, but he didn't have access to it. Because even though I would say, especially in the northwest suburbs, I think we do have a lot of good resources. they weren't easily obtainable for him. I mean, if you don't have a car, you don't have a
Right.
house, and you don't have any insurance, where are these assets? And shortly after that, we actually have something in our system called AID, where we are tied with a social work program. So if we have patients who need further care, we can actually get their information and pass this on to social workers who will reach out and help with a litany of needs, but mental health is one of them. But yeah, that one, yeah, it still sticks with me. I mean, I haven't seen him in a while, so I like to think that he found the care that needed. But you know how it is. There's always someone who kind of sticks with your
Yeah.
mindset.
No, 100%. I think that's good. And I like that there's this idea that tied with social, because I think that's one of the things that we're always missing, especially depending on volumes of the emergency departments.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to do the follow up. They're not going to get those resources as far as being able to meet up with a social worker because of exactly what you said, the lack of transportation, or even just whatever they've got going on in their disease process is not going to inhibit them to be able to get the care that they need.
This episode is brought to you by Ease Alert Heart Smart Alerting Solutions. Have you ever been jolted awake by a blaring station alarm only to sprint out half asleep, heart pounding? That's that legacy fire station alerting system, and it's doing much more harm than good. So meet Ease Alert, the world's first heart smart firefighting alerting system. Designed by firefighters, proven by science, their purpose-built alerting devices deliver vibration and visual alerts, shaving seconds off of turnout times while improving health for the first responder. Ease Alert isn't just about comfort, it's about safety. Firefighters are 14 times more likely to die from heart attacks during alarm responses than during non-emergency duties. Ease Alert's Heart Smart system slashes stress, improves performance safety, and allows you to be the best firefighter you can be, on duty and at home. From bunk alerts and wristbands to dispatching consoles, display boards, and firehouse lighting, every component is purpose-built by firefighters for firefighters. No more missed tones, no more startled response, just fast, smooth, safe alerts. Fire departments across the country like Mission, Texas, and St. Augustine, Florida, report calmer crews and faster turnout times. And their chiefs even say that the system is battle-tested and firefighter approved. So are you ready to switch? Visit easealert.com and discover how silent alerting can save time, reduce stress, and improve safety for you, your crew, and your community. Visit easealert.com to learn more and tell them National Fire Radio sent you.
Do you believe that most departments have a clear understanding of what defines a mental health emergency?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I will say I think we have gotten significantly better about mental health in general, probably within the last 5 years. And I don't know if that was driven by COVID and where I think we kind of were forced to face with a lot of mental health issues because everything was shut down. But I know from my perspective in my department, we not only talk about mental health and how to handle it, we talk about our own mental health. Which is huge. I mean, when I started back in 2013, it was more of that suck it up buttercup mentality. It was like people with mental health issues were deemed as, quote unquote weak. And I remember that really stuck with me for a while. And now I think we've gotten past that process, at least in my area, and are really saying, no, this is a chronic disease process. And these are people who are just as deserving of our compassion and understanding and patience as someone who's struggling with a physical ailment that we can see. So I very much have loved that has kind of it's flipped the script, so to say. And even when I see some of these hardened, tough guys who, like, I mean, some of the guys I even work with who I think that they're just like, they're tough bro men. It's how I always call them. I see them on some of these mental health calls and my heart melts a little bit because it's like they've turned into these really kind, compassionate people who I think understand, like sometimes I understand patience is hard at 3:00 in the morning, but I like to think that we're all looking at these people with more patience nowadays. I can't speak for all departments. I would tell you that maybe what is that saying? 150 years of tradition unimpeded by progress.
Right.
Some of the older departments, or some of, are probably still not there yet. But like with this article, I hope that people can read it and say, maybe we need to change our approach as opposed to, like you've said, the load and go mentality.
Yeah, and I know, like, we've talked about this a little bit before. One of the things that, in my experience of the area that I service, we have two colleges, and it seems like every year, we're coming across patients who are essentially growing into their. Correct me if I get this wrong, Megan. They grow into their schizophrenia, where they're in that freshman or junior year or sophomore year, and they're starting to hear the voices, and they go into that breakdown. And where and I try to impress upon my people, like, this is a new diagnosis for them, and it's the first time. So it's like having that compassion instead of just being like, oh, you're crazy. Like, they're sometimes they're acutely aware that what they're hearing is not them, but they're still hearing it, and they're seeking out the help. So, like, just that little bit of kindness goes a long way in the process of getting them in the back of the ambulance, getting them up to the hospital, and getting them evaluated, and hopefully getting them on the right treatment. Because I think how we present to the emergency department is also, critically important in getting the patient the care that they need in their life moving forward.
I love your approach, and you hit the nail on the head. For schizophrenia, they say that most symptoms don't start until late adolescence. So this is someone who not only is on their own probably for the first time, but is also now faced with probably very scary symptoms. And I always tell people it takes just as much energy to treat someone with kindness as it does with judgment. You know
Right.
what I mean? So you guys are, I love that you have that mentality.
Yeah. Is there a way that we can better define and categorize mental health emergencies operationally, you think?
I think, do you mean like define what a mental health emergency is, or how better to treat them?
Define what they are, and I guess to some extent, like, the limited treatment that we can do.
Yeah. I think when it comes to the definition, that's really hard because I have found that mental health is such a broad spectrum diagnosis. You have people who are struggling with depression, as you say, people who are struggling with schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder, any kind of a litany of different, issues. I think that when we're talking with these patients, I would say the most important part of it is the first to take a step and take a deep breath and realize that unless they're a danger to themselves or to others, right now we can take an extra 5 minutes to build a rapport with this patient. Why did they call us? Are they calling us because they're having a panic attack? Do they have undiagnosed anxiety yet? Are they calling us because today is the worst day of their lives and they're thinking of suicidal ideation? These are patients that if we, it's hard. It has to be that change of mindset because we tend to be really quick with everything we do. Everything's an emergency. But these are the patients that we can take that extra minute, talk to them, and actively listen, because there's a chance that you are the first person that's ever taken that moment to truly listen to what this person has to say. Depending on what their support system is like, maybe people have just told them, get over it. I have found, like, especially with panic attacks, people don't treat panic attacks as though it's that big of a deal. But for that person, in talking to people who struggle with anxiety, for that person, it feels like the world is ending. So can we provide them with some distraction? I've found that when I was coached on how to handle panic attacks in patients, I was always told, tell them to focus on their breathing. In talking to people who have anxiety, they told me, if you make me think about my body, I'm going to lose my mind. So I did a little bit more, research on that. Distraction is huge for people with panic attacks. Have them describe the color of something, feel the sensation, tell them, what is the time on the clock? Can you read my badge? Because that actually takes their brain from a pathway of overthinking to more of a stimulus pathway, that they can focus on that, and it actually helps regulate their whole nervous system. People who are struggling with depression, it could be situational, but it also could be late onset. I myself developed depression later on in life, and it was harder for me to kind of say, well, I've never struggled with this before. Eventually it will go away. And eventually, with the right treatment and right therapy, it did. But these people might not know how to get that help. So for us, like, we have resources in our rigs that we can offer people. Like, here are your local, therapists that are offering pro bono work if you don't have any money. Here are some resources for addiction treatment if you need it. So if you can have a list of local resources for them, I think that's huge. And it's also taking that extra step to say, hey, I do care about you. Because I tend to find the number one answer everyone gives for why they got in the fire service, and as corny as it always sounds, it's because they want to help someone. Well, these are people that we can help. And so I think just taking that time with kindness and patience, you can help them. And if you have resources like we have, like I said, we're very blessed to have AID say, hey, right now we're going to take you to the hospital to take care of this. But they can only do so much right here. Would you like us to refer you to social workers who can help you further along your path? You'll find a lot of people are pretty receptive to that.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing I always tell people is, and it's hard to get away from, is not judging, because something that might be pretty benign to someone, like the 16-year-old who just got broken up with and it's the worst day of their lives, and for those of us later in our lives, we might say, well, that's so silly. but for that,
especially 16... in a firehouse.
Yes,
this is Bob. He's 7 divorces in. Don't tell me about your heartbreak, kid.
100%.
Yeah.
So it's hard to kind of say, well, wait, but for this individual, this is the worst thing that they've had to encounter so far. So what a blessing it is that something that for the rest of us seems so maybe quote unquote silly, but for them, their feeling is still very valid, and treat them with that compassion that you'd still treat someone who maybe had something more serious happen in their day.
But, and that was one of my next questions, is like implicit bias or stigma playing a role in how first responders treat mental health patients. How do we begin to address that within the firehouse culture?
I think talking about it openly is huge. I have loved seeing that change particular in the firehouse, of being able to talk about emotions and feelings. And actually at my department, our fire chief, my chief Mothy, actually started a health and wellness initiative for our whole department. And he sat us down and he said, it is just as important to me that we focus on your mental health just as much as we focus on your physical health. So we have a whole committee that is geared around, let's talk about, the difference between mental health and mental wellness. And by encouraging our guys to talk about it openly, I think not only are we helping the rest of our members or even others in the fire service embrace mental health, it's going to help us with those calls as well. Like, I laugh because I'm very open about the fact that I go to therapy, and then I laugh because 4 of us at the same department share the same therapist, and we're all very open about it. We think it's, hey, it's good to take care of yourself mentally just as much as we're expected to be dynamic athletes and work out and eat well and take care of ourselves. We can't take care of others if we're also, not mentally healthy. So,
I think like there's so much to unpack here, because as you've been, like, when we went, just go back to the question that we had before, and you're talking about listening to people who, first time diagnoses, or that they're going through it, and like a lot of this stuff too, not that this is exactly where the conversation was and the article is about, but like for our own, right? These are skills to have for our own people if they are going through their own mental health crisis, because we know that, like, we've become more aware in the past, however many years, that like suicide and mental health awareness within our own industry is important, with PTSD and everything else, or moral injuries. But like this is an opportunity to practice these skills so that, God forbid, you have to talk to a fellow brother or sister, you're versed in this. You're using these skills. Now it's for the patient. Now it's with one of our own. So like there's a lot of connection between this and what we can do for ourselves. And I think the fact that you have a health and wellness program, that you're worrying about the mental health, because I'm big into therapy. I like to talk about therapy. I'm on medications, and I'm open about that because I want to break stigma when it comes to, if you need something for depression. Like, you said before, I also was, had this late in life idea that, and I was like, well, you mean I'm depressed? That's what's going on?
Yeah,
But
that's
I'm
how I
happy all
felt.
the time, right? Like,
Yep.
and 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 I don't, and I got caught that it was a trap. It wasn't a nice trap, because I was like, I mean, come on, when I party, I'm drinking, I'm having a good time, and they're like, you don't think that's
Hmm.
part of it? And I was like, oh, all right, you son of a bitch, you got me.
I hate
Um,
it when they're right.
but in all honesty, it's one of those things where I think we should be more open about it. And I know I pimp my therapist out a lot to people because she's working for me, and I'm a first responder, and I think that's one of the huge things for us to get over sometimes, is having somebody who's comfortable when we're talking about what we need to talk about, whether it be,
Mhm.
not that it's always going to be about the job, but if the job comes up, there's no judgment there, and I don't have to worry about her passing out and now me having to treat her, like,
Yeah. Like, all right, well now I'm in charge again. No,
yeah,
I uh, I always say my original article. I laughed because I only get so many words, and I don't know if you can tell that I like to talk, but I like to talk. And my original article, it was like three times the length it was supposed to be, because I did turn it from being about how can we be better advocates for our patients, and then it kind of turned into how can we also be better advocates for ourselves on the same topic. And my editor at Firehouse was like, "Hey, great article, will not fit on one page," so we had to curtail
yeah,
it a little bit. But he told me that next year I hope to write more about the taking care of our own aspect as well, because I can tell you, I know since you're chief at your department, like the impact that just one person can have on someone who's struggling. I will always go back to my chief, who I just adore. But when I first started struggling with depression, and he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, whatever it is you're going through," he's like, "just know that we're here for you and we're going to get you through this."
yeah.
And the impact that such a simple statement had on me was like, "Whoa, I'm not alone." So I love that. I love that that is kind of where our culture is going, and that you are open about it at your department too.
Yeah. When it comes to training, what kind of mental health training would you like to see standardized across departments? Like, should it be scenario based, classroom focused, or involve partnerships with mental health professionals, or all of the above?
Definitely all of the above. I think that sometimes when we do, like for us, we call it hands-on EMS training. I love the hands-on EMS. I always think it's a great challenge, but one of the things we tend to be missing is some of that excitement or escalation that we might be seeing in some of these mental health patients, because typically we'll pick one of our own to act out the scenario. Um, and there, trust me, I work with some great actors who love to put you through the ringer, but you're not really dealing with someone who might not be able to have the wherewithal to like really focus on what's happening around them. Like they might be having a manic episode, they might be having a schizophrenic episode. If they are like screaming and yelling and like kind of quote unquote freaking out at you, I would love for us to be able to somehow find a way to get that real in practice. How do we de-escalate people who are beyond reasoning with? Is it possible? Is this someone that we can, because we always talk, it goes, verbal, chemical, physical restraint. And I have found good verbal de-escalation is incredible. One of the guys I work with, he's actually my partner on the engine. I will tell you, he has a way with people. I don't know what it is, but just the way in which he talks to them and approaches them
Yeah.
um,
His
helps
verbal
bring them
judo is
down.
strong.
It's insane. I mean, I like to think I'm an approachable person, but he kicks my butt in that area. So how do we make it that we help de-escalate the issue and not excite them more? And
Mm.
on our end, that takes a lot of patience. So how do we practice that patience? And that also very much turns into how can we work with local law enforcement, because sometimes they get there first, and they don't always get the same training that we get. So can we combine training with them with how can we be better advocates for our patients? And then once we get to the point of, hey, we've de-escalated the situation in whatever way we had to, how can we then provide or offer further care? And that's where, like for us, working with social workers, I think is huge. My one coworker, his wife is a social worker, and she constantly is talking about, how can we form networks essentially where social workers can be more readily available for these people. And I know it does come to money as well, unfortunately, but we do have a lot of people who volunteer their time, which is huge because there is only so much we can do. On our end, we can give them the immediate relief, but then we can provide some resources to them to help further that care. And then hopefully we never have to go to them on an emergency again.
Can you just kind of touch on the importance of de-escalation tactics and communication training for first responders? Because I feel like this is something that it's like so a blinding flash of the obvious. It's so in front of us, but it's something that we don't really focus on.
Mm-hmm. So I think that because our mindset tends to be such a go, go, go mindset, the first thing is, like I said, kind of taking that time to take a step back, take a deep breath. And I find that when you get on their level, if they're sitting, we always talk about, we do this for people to kind of give them that even eye, that we're not looking down on them. Get on their level and look them in the eyes and ask them and be authentic in it. Say, what's going on today? And this is where active listening plays such an important role in how we can handle these patients. Really take that time to listen to what they're saying without any preconceived judgment or any preconceived notions of what they're going through. Like I said, some of these people have never had a positive interaction with either us or law enforcement or therapists or whatever. And then in order to kind of prove that you're active listening, repeat back to them what they said. If they're saying, hey, I'm having a really difficult time right now, my dog just died, blah, 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 and they give it to you, repeat back to them and say, so what I'm understanding is that this is a really bad day for you. And it sounds like you're going through a lot more than people go through on a normal day. And if you can take that extra second to just validate what their experience is, I have found that all of a sudden they're receptive to you, because chances are maybe they've just been blown off their entire time. They call people and no one wants to help, or it is the load and go, or it is the just get back in the back of the ambulance or whatever. So I find that validating them, really listening to them, and just giving that space for them of that, hey, you're right. I can't understand what you're going through right now because your experience is totally unique to you, but I'm listening to you and I'm here to help you in whatever way I can. It goes such a long way, because a lot of these people, I think, feel isolated in what they're struggling with. If, I know I always say people, like, from my own experience, depression is a very isolating feeling. You feel like no one else feels the way that you feel. And despite the fact that science and numbers tell me other people struggle with this, in that moment when I'm struggling, you feel kind of like, oh, you're on your own island. So let them know, extend that hand. Here, I'm here to help you. You aren't alone. And we are going to do whatever we can to help you take care of this issue that you're struggling with. And that's a huge part of it, just the active listening. Because we struggle, we want to solve the problem immediately. These aren't people whose problems we can solve right then and there, or the 20 or 30 minutes we're with them. But we can help them start that process to get the help that they need.
Firehouse software got you buried in tabs, logins, and paper sign-in sheets. You've got one system for training, another for reporting, something else for alerting, scheduling, inspections. You get the idea. That's why departments across the country are switching to Alpine Software's Red Alert, the tailor-made fire service software that brings everything together in one system with one bill and no more paperwork. Red Alert replaces your pile of platforms with a single, customizable solution that handles training, alerting, inspections, truck checks, percentage reports, award points, ISO prep, OSHA tracking, the list goes on, everything you do your way. No two Red Alert systems are the same. Alpine builds your software around the unique needs of your department. And when it's time to switch, Alpine will convert all your old data with no setup fees at zero risk. Their entire team is based in Rochester, New York, which means no support runaround. You can pick up the phone and speak to somebody who understands the fire service and gets your issues fixed. With over 30 years of trust and an average customer tenure of 19 years, Alpine's mission is to be the last software purchase your department ever makes. It's battle tested, firefighter approved, and nearest ready. So if you're ready to save time, reduce costs, and finally get control of your operations, visit alpinesoftware.com for a completely free consultation. That's alpinesoftware.com. Red Alert by Alpine Software. Built for the job, backed by firefighters.
Now, one of the things that I always kind of in the back of my mind, it's just something I'm probably just nervous about in general, but mental health patients, like we have our people who are struggling with depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and then every now and then you can run into people who are violent, which is why the de-escalation techniques are important. Do you have any insight into where violence kind of comes into the realm of this? Because I don't want us to, I want to be, like, I want to tread through the weeds carefully here, because I don't want us to think of our mental health patients as violent patients, because I think 99.9% of them are not, but there is that 0.1 that can, the incident, the call can go sideways. Is there anything that you can have insight-wise onto that?
That is where training really is important for us. And I think when we say finding the people who can act the part well is important, because you are 100% correct that I would say most of these people aren't violent, but there are times where their mental health is so forefront in their mind that reasoning isn't going to help them. You know, they're not able to, in that moment, look at you with like, okay, you know, no, you make sense, because their brain's been hijacked is how I compare it. Whether it's a manic episode, a schizophrenic episode, whether drugs are involved or not involved. You know, we've all had those patients where it's, you know, you can talk all you want, but it's not sinking in. It's just going in one ear and out the other. So training with law enforcement is very important, because I think that it's important to let law enforcement know that we're all on the same side. I know that they've had a huge target on their back lately with, you know, they don't want to go hands-on because they're afraid of what the public will say, because everyone's being recorded nowadays. So if you have a violent patient, the first thing I say is definitely be aware of your own safety. Are we worried about guns? Are we worried about weapons? What are we looking at? So keeping your distance from this patient is super important in the beginning. And then once you've tried your verbal de-escalation and you realize this isn't working, that's where you then have to say, all right, we know that this person is a danger to themselves in their current mindset, and they have to go to the hospital until they can get the help that they need in order to get to a point where their mind is able to reason again. So working on what are our physical methods that we can help restrain this person, and then what are our chemical methods. And that's why when I talk about training, especially for us in our line of work, we have Versed, we have ketamine, we have medications that we can give to help chemically restrain the patient, but it is so imperative that we understand the impact that these medications can have on the patient, because I'm sure you've seen the news, just like we have in Illinois, where there have been times where a patient was given too much of a medication and then they unfortunately passed away. So I say, if you are going to chemically restrain your patient, because sometimes that's your only option. Unfortunately, it's a last line of defense, but we have to if we want to help them. Know your dose limits. Understand, like I say, the pathophysiology. What's the impact we're looking at? Are we looking at their respiratory system is going to be depressed? Are we looking at that we have to be prepared for all possible symptoms that they're going to have from this? Ketamine is a great medication that we study all the time. We're always talking about it. And for us, like, we have that understanding. Okay, we have this patient. We have to give them ketamine because they're in excited delirium. We then know automatically who's going to be in charge of airway, who's going to be in charge of getting an IV, who's going to be in charge of monitoring their vital signs, so that, yes, in this case, we might be sedating them, and I've seen it where ketamine hasn't worked on anybody, and I've seen it where it worked really, really well. So I want to be prepared for both scenarios of, okay, now we took away their airway. We have to be prepared to immediately intubate or try to be bag them or whatever. So that's where tabletop discussion can be huge. Every morning, if you can look at your crew and say, whether it's a cardiac arrest, a psych call, talk about different calls and say, hey, if this happens, we get this psych call, we have to give them ketamine. All right, like today I'm going to be in charge of airway. So there's not even a question on the scene of what's going to happen. You know, my partner is going to be in charge of drawing up the drugs, and he's going to triple and quadruple check with all of us around that we're not giving too much. So being prepared for worst case scenario, because that's our job.
Yeah.
How can we then support anything that's going to happen to this patient after that fact? Because there are times, I'd love to think that everyone's going to listen to me and want to be my friend and go to the hospital. But sometimes, even though I like to think I'm likable, they don't like me. And we have to do what we can to care for them because they're not able to care for themselves in that moment. You know,
Yeah.
They're probably a lovely person 99% of the time. Right now they're having a really bad day.
I like how you kind of talk about the, going physical, verbal de-escalation, physical, chemical, and then, and what was after chemical?
Support services. So that's where we're gonna talk about whatever chemical that we're giving or whatever medication we're giving. We're ready for then the effects that's going to have.
I teach a class called Active Shooter Fire Department Personnel in the Line of Fire, and I talk about use of force because if we're faced with violent attacks, we have to be able to defend ourselves, but we have to know and understand the use of force and how that relates to what we're doing in the back of an ambulance or on the scene when somebody is actively trying to hurt us and using this, the same and appropriate force, etc., and getting into that. And what you described is like a use of force almost of, and I don't want to use that exact terminology, but it's what we're going to use for right now because I don't have anything better. But like it's having that plan, and that's because that's one of the things. You see the articles, you see the news stories of crews out there who have either given too much ketamine and something's gone horribly wrong. And there's sometimes where some of them I've looked at and I've been like, what did you think was going to happen when you gave these drugs and you put the patient face down on the stretcher and then you sat on top? Like, there's got to be some kind of common sense that happens there. But I like the idea of having, because we're always wondering what we can do for an EMS drill that's different. That's not just splinting or, going through the skill sheets. This is a tabletop of getting everybody in the same room and talking about that mental health patient that you're going to have to use chemical sedation on, and how everybody's going to have a role into it. That's awesome. I really like that. I took a couple notes here on that one. So,
and I think it's important too. Like, I think it's hard because a lot of these patients sometimes they can find that little jab at you that's going to like make your anger spike a little bit. And I think it's important to remember that they're not trying to impact your feelings. They're not trying to hurt you. It's just that they're going through something right now. So we shouldn't take personal offense to the things that they say and do. I think that's hard for us sometimes, but it's like I said, it's just like we wouldn't expect, anything different. Like if someone's diabetic, I think that's for me, diabetes tends to be an easy one to kind of compare, where when someone's blood sugar is low and they're maybe acting a little bit out of sorts, it's not because that's who that is as a person, it's because their sugar is low. So we should treat the same approach to people who are having a mental health crisis. It's not that that's who that person is, it's that their mental health their brain has been hijacked. So give them that a little bit of patience, a little bit of understanding.
Yeah, I love that idea of their brain being hijacked, because it's such a great way to bridge the known from the unknown. I think about an airplane being hijacked. It's the same thing with their brain. I love that. Yeah. You're active in your department's health and wellness committee, right?
That is correct, yes.
How do you think mental health training for responders intersects with our own behavioral health needs as first responders?
I think they just definitely go hand in hand. I think by giving grace and by understanding that mental health is not just your mind playing tricks on you, that it is an actual diagnosis and it's a chronic illness that many struggle with, that by understanding that this exists and giving it the space that it deserves, we're now also giving way for people in our own departments to be able to talk about their days. If you can say, give it that understanding, depression is real, and it's not your fault that your serotonin levels are out of whack, and it's not your fault that or if you do struggle with anxiety, like your brain is just trying to figure out its own pathways to normal, and sometimes something goes a little haywire. uh Letting these people feel like they're not alone, because I think a lot of our members have suffered in silence for too long. I think a lot of them have thought, because of what they heard on calls. I mean, like I said, 2013 wasn't that long ago. That's when I started. And I remember hearing the way that some of the older guys would talk about our psych calls, and how I was like, well, if that's how you feel about this patient, then I don't really have space to talk about it, because you're going to think I'm mentally weak as well. And that's not the case. It's just that you need treatment just like anyone else does, and you're just as deserving of that treatment as someone with a physical ailment that we can see with our eyes. So getting rid of the stigma, I really hope to see that change even more in the fire service. And I think I have, like, we talk about, we have peer support. I think that's huge. I'm a peer supporter. I help teach at a local fire academy, and they have a day where the guy who runs peer support in our area comes in and talks to the cadets and says, hey, this is just as important as you taking care of yourself physically. And I love that we're now starting that conversation at the beginning of their career, rather before it kind of has fallen its path. Where we have a very heavy drinking culture, so that doesn't always make things easier for people. And I think that they got used to covering up their sadness with the drinking as well. So I'm glad to see that I think it probably started with how can we treat our patients better and provide better patient care. And now it's kind of intersecting into, okay, well, we're just as deserving of that same care, and we deserve to take care of each other that way. We want to take this brotherhood and sisterhood seriously. That pertains to both physical and mental health. Just like if we've had guys who get injured, or guys who have been diagnosed with cancer. I know at our department, we had quite a few guys who were diagnosed with cancer, and everyone rallied to take care of them. That's the same mentality we're now giving people who are maybe struggling with mental health issues.
What advice would you give to departments looking to start the conversation about mental health response without alienating members who may be skeptical or hesitant?
That's a really good question. I think education is the best way to start. We had a therapist come in, talk to us, he's a retired firefighter himself, and it has started with the most basic discussion of mental health versus mental wellness, and what is the difference between the two, and just acknowledging that these are real diagnoses. You can't, no matter if you are skeptical about it, to be skeptical, as I use the words correctly, being skeptical about mental health is like to kind of say, like, okay, are you skeptical about diabetes or these things that you can see? But we now have science to show us, yes, like these are people who, if you're manic, we're seeing serotonin levels go through the roof during those episodes, as opposed to maybe an underproduction of serotonin at different times. If you're struggling with anxiety, we understand that your fight or flight is being enacted, and you can show that on a scientific and physical level. So letting people understand, hey, maybe this isn't something that you've been exposed to previously in your career, especially if you're maybe a little bit older, it's harder to make change, but say, here's the information, here's the research, this is a thing. And I think finding what drives them in the fire service is probably huge. I had a coworker tell me that if you want to motivate someone, find what drives them. Is it because they want to be better at their job? Is it because they want to help people? Is it because, are they motivated by anything else? Talking to them on that level, like, hey, you want to be really good at your job? This is a way to do that. Hey, you want to help people? You can say, these are the people who need us just as much as anybody else. And getting on their level and saying, we're here because we want to help. So maybe tugging at their heartstrings a little bit. As tough as we like to pretend we are, I think we're just as a bunch of mushpots as everyone else. And breaking it down on maybe a level that a very basic level. So just talking about the basics of mental health. And yeah, I think a lot of people, I've heard the rhetoric before that they think that our generations are getting weaker because of how many people are being diagnosed with these disorders. And it's not because they're getting weaker, it's because people are more comfortable talking about it now. And
Yeah.
how amazing is that people are comfortable talking about what they're feeling as opposed to just covering it up. You know, I like to think that everyone wants to be compassionate, and that just by giving them the info and saying, you know, it, or even if you just have to tell them, it takes no extra effort from you to be kind to somebody. That's a really good way I like to think about it. It's just as easy to be kind as it is to be a butthead.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. What's next? I mean, we've almost been going for about an hour here, but like, what's next for you in terms of advocacy or writing? Do you plan to continue contributing to whether it be Firehouse Magazine or other publications in the industry?
Yes, I've been lucky enough to be asked to write for Firehouse on a fairly consistent basis, and it's awesome because I get to do EMS, so it's kind of all the topics. I know my next one is more on med math and how can we ensure that we are providing the right dosage to our patients, because, you know, sometimes you don't really want to have to do the math right there and make a mistake. So how can we better prepare people for those scenarios? But I do plan on writing an article geared purely towards firefighter mental health and how can we be better advocates for each other. Because I think we're all kind of aware firefighter suicide is, it's more than it should be. It should be none, but if we can help start broaching that subject and help people feel comfortable talking in those spaces, I want people to read that article and hopefully say, you know what, it's okay for me to maybe have a bad day and talk about it. You know,
if there's a young firefighter out there, paramedic, EMT, who came to you asking how to better prepare for mental health calls, what resources, books, or training would you point them towards?
Ooh, that's a really good one. I did a lot of my research. So the way I typically find things is I like to start with scientific journals. So literally all I did was type in mental health fire service scientific journal, and that's going to get you the nitty-gritty science behind everything. That's where you're going to find a lot of the facts and a lot of the information that I think helps you understand that it is a problem in our society right now and how we are seeing more mental health calls on our end because of the lack of care. And once you can start building that foundation of understanding, I then kind of turned to my own therapist, but there's a lot of really good books. My therapist personally, his name's Robert Jackson. He's written books on trauma and how to better care for people with traumatic events in their lives, whether it's a mental or a physical event. But there are so many amazing resources online that we're starting to see more articles pop up that if you just Google mental health, fire service, or EMS methods on how to better care for these patients, there's so many smart people out there who have written wonderful things that I'm very lucky to read.
What's one thing you hope that listeners or readers take away from your article, or more importantly, put into practice?
Kindness and compassion can go a long way. I think that I'd love to see that we treat every patient with kindness and compassion, no matter what their call is, no matter how many times we've seen them, no matter what time of day, no matter how tired we are, that everybody is a human being and they all deserve us to be at our best and to be at our kindest.
Awesome. Well, Megan, I want to say, is there anything else you want to add to this before we wrap up? Because this has been fantastic.
It's been awesome. No, I've loved every minute of it.
Where can people find you if they want to get a hold of you or reach out to ask questions? Or you have like social media, Instagram, TikTok, or anything like that? Or
you can always email me and I will respond to emails. My email is mfunk@stcharlesil.gov. And then I'm pretty good at checking my Instagram too. If you want to go on social media, it's mfunk87. So people can message me wherever. I'm an open book, and I love to talk and I love answering questions. So I'm always here as a resource.
Awesome. Well, Megan, thank you so much for sitting down with me today and kind of diving into this. I said I was very impressed with the article, and I'm happy that you wrote it because it drove this conversation today. And
thank you.
I appreciate you. Stick around for a minute once we wrap up here, but this is Rob from Frontline Mindset with National Fire Radio. Megan Funk coming to us with all of the facts today on mental health and some tips, tricks, and whatnot we can kind of use in the field. Megan, thank you so much. We will see you guys on the next one. Be safe out there. This is Rob, Frontline Mindset.
Fire Radio.